At 2:13 in the morning, my son screamed from his crib, and 40 seconds of our security footage turned to static. That was the moment I stopped believing it was a possum getting into the trash cans. My name is Renee Callahan. I was 39 then, a supply chain officer at Fort Bragg, living in a 2-story colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac outside Spring Lake, North Carolina. Nothing remarkable about the house: vinyl siding, a basketball hoop nobody used anymore, a garden gnome my mother-in-law had given us as a joke that somehow never got thrown away. My husband, Paul, worked in pharmaceutical sales and traveled 2 or 3 weeks out of every month, a schedule that had always felt manageable when I could count on my own routine to fill the gaps. He was supposedly on a work trip in Richmond that week. I was home alone with our 14-month-old son, Miles. The house had been ours for just under 2 years, bought right after Paul's promotion, close enough to base that my commute stayed under 15 minutes and quiet enough that I genuinely believed, moving in, that we'd found the safest possible place to raise a kid. I want that detail on the record, because it matters for everything that came after. This wasn't a house I'd ever once felt uneasy in. Until that night, it had never occurred to me to feel anything else. The sound came first, a soft thud against the side of the house, like something brushing the gutter downspout. I sat up in bed and listened, and before I could decide whether it was worth investigating, Miles started screaming, not the fussy half-cry of a baby losing his pacifier, but the raw, panicked kind that makes your whole body move before your brain catches up. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept beside the nightstand and moved down the hallway. "Mommy's here, buddy," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. Miles was standing in his crib, gripping the rail, red-faced and hiccuping. His window was closed. His closet was empty. I checked every room in that house: kitchen, laundry room, the half-finished home office, the garage, every door locked, every window latched exactly the way I'd left them. I carried Miles back to my room and pulled up the security app on my phone. For cameras, front door, driveway, backyard, and the upstairs hallway outside Miles's room. All 4 showed as online. I scrolled backward to 2:12 a.m. empty backyard. 2:13 a.m. static, 40 straight seconds of gray noise and a faint electronic whine. 2:14 a.m., the yard again, empty, undisturbed. I replayed it 4 times. Same 40 seconds, gone every time. I sat up the rest of that night with every light in the house burning and a kitchen chair wedged under the back door handle. By 7:30 the next morning, I'd called in late to base, packed Miles's diaper bag, and pulled the DVR unit out from under the entertainment center. I drove it to a security outfit near Bragg Boulevard called Sandhills Digital, where a technician named Marcus, round glasses, a coffee mug that read "World's okayest IT guy," spent nearly an hour coaxing the corrupted file back to life. When the footage finally rendered, it showed the hallway door outside Miles's room opening slowly, just a few inches, not kicked or forced. A shoulder moved into frame. Marcus leaned closer to the screen, and I watched every ounce of color drain out of his face before he'd even said a word. "Ma'am," he said, barely above a whisper, "you need to get your son and go somewhere else tonight." The image was dark, grainy, the person's face lost in shadow. But it was unmistakable. Someone had been standing inside the doorway of my son's room. Someone who hadn't broken a single window to get there. I don't fully remember the drive home. I remember buckling Miles into his car seat with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and I remember pulling into a gas station parking lot to call 911 because I didn't trust myself to keep driving and dial at the same time. 2 Cumberland County deputies arrived within 20 minutes, a calm, unhurried sergeant named Reyes and a younger deputy who barely spoke. They watched the footage twice. "It's unsettling, no question," Reyes admitted. "But the file's too damaged to make a positive ID. We'll write it up, add extra patrols, and I'd recommend changing your locks and checking your smoke detectors for hidden devices." "That's it?" I asked. "Someone stood outside my son's door and I just wait?" "I didn't say wait," he said. "I said the footage alone won't get us far yet. Whoever this was didn't force entry. That tells us something too." He was right, and I hated that he was right. By noon I'd called a locksmith. By 4, every lock in the house had been replaced. I still couldn't make myself sleep there that night. I packed enough for Miles and me and drove to my sister Colleen's place in Durham. That evening, once Miles was finally down in a borrowed pack-and-play, I called Paul. He answered on the 3rd ring. Someone was in the house last night, I said. Outside Miles's room. Silence. Then, are you okay? Physically, yes. I told him everything, the sound, the scream, the missing footage, the recovery. When I finished, he was quiet long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. Did you actually see a face? He finally asked. No. The footage is too dark. So you don't actually know it was a person in his room. Could have been a shadow. A glitch. Marcus watched it too, Paul. He told me to leave the house. I'm just saying, don't jump to conclusions before we know more. Not once, in that entire call, did he ask if Miles had been scared. Not once did he ask if anyone had touched him. He asked, twice, exactly what I'd been able to see on the screen. The next morning, sitting at Colleen's kitchen table with a legal pad, I wrote one question at the top of the page: who has a key? I listed the obvious names: myself, Paul, Paul's mother, and one more. Danny Ostrowski, a contractor Paul had known since high school, who'd spent nearly a month the previous spring finishing our basement and building the shelving in Miles's closet. I remembered handing him a spare key so he could let himself in on days I was on base. I couldn't remember ever getting it back. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the front porch camera. Nobody was visible, but sitting neatly centered on the welcome mat was Miles's stuffed elephant, the one I distinctly remembered packing into his diaper bag before we left. Someone wanted me to know they'd been back. The deputies bagged it for prints. Nothing usable came back except Miles's prints and mine. Whoever left it had either worn gloves or handled it with real care. 2 days later, I drove back to the house alone while Colleen stayed with Miles. I sat in the driveway for a long moment before going inside, feeling something I'd never once felt walking into a building during my entire career: genuine hesitation. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, was out watering her hydrangeas and waved me over. "Honey, I've been worried sick," she said. I saw a truck. 3 different nights, always after midnight. Older model, dark green, parked down by the vacant lot instead of out front. She hadn't caught the plate. She had noticed the driver kept the headlights off the entire time. Across the street, retired Army Master Sergeant Otis Freeman spent most afternoons on his porch with black coffee. He told me he'd heard Miles crying that night, heard a truck door close softly a few minutes later, and heard the engine start only after it had already begun rolling down the slight grade of the street, the specific, deliberate quiet of someone who didn't want to be noticed. That wasn't luck. That was planning. A neighbor 2 doors down had a doorbell camera angled toward the street. Together we watched nearly an hour of footage until, at 2:07 a.m., a dark green pickup rolled slowly past with no headlights, and left again 11 minutes later. The image was too blurry for the plate, but the model was unmistakable: an older Ford, the same style Danny Ostrowski drove. I called him that evening. "Hey, Renee, how's the little guy?" he answered, easy and warm. "We're okay. I need to ask you something. Were you anywhere near my house Monday night?" "Nope. Home all night." "Why?" His answer came a half-second too fast. I drove to his place the next morning. He was in his driveway loading tools into his truck bed, and he laughed when I asked him directly. "You really think I'd sneak into your house? Renee, come on. I don't know what to think right now." "You're treating this like some kind of deployment," he said, shaking his head. "Running your whole neighborhood like an op." I froze. I had never told Danny how I'd cleared the house room by room that first night. Not to him. Not to anyone but the deputies, after the fact. Somehow, he already knew exactly how I'd searched it. I didn't sleep well after that conversation. His words kept circling, running your whole neighborhood like an op, and the more I tried to explain it away as a guess, the less that explanation actually held. I requested another personal day. My commanding officer, Colonel Whitfield, didn't push for details. "Take what you need, Callahan," she said simply. Instead of going back to Sandhills Digital, I drove 2 hours to a forensic recovery lab in Charlotte called Piedmont Evidence Recovery, referred by a detective friend from base. A technician named Dana Ruiz took the DVR apart and spent almost 4 hours coaxing more data out of the corrupted sector. "I got you a few more seconds," she finally said. 11, to be exact. She pressed play. The timestamp read 2:13 and 9 seconds a.m. The hallway door swung open, slow, deliberate, not forced. A figure stepped in, face hidden beneath a dark ball cap, and crossed directly to Miles's crib without hesitation, the confident movement of someone who already knew the layout of the room by heart. Instead of lifting him, the figure reached down and brushed 2 fingers lightly across his hair, once, gently, before standing there simply watching him cry. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Dana rewound the clip. "Watch the boots," she said. She zoomed in on a single clear frame. Tan work boots, heavy tread, a small embroidered logo on the side, a green diamond with 2 words stitched inside it, Ostrowski Construction. I felt my whole body go rigid. Danny had worn boots exactly like that every single day he'd worked in our basement. I drove straight from Charlotte to Danny's house, replaying that footage the entire way, the confidence, the familiarity, the gentleness that somehow made it worse instead of better. When I pulled into his gravel driveway, the garage door hung open and his truck was gone. His neighbor, out getting her mail, told me he'd left early that morning loading boxes into his truck, looking, in her words, nervous as hell. I drove directly to the sheriff's office. Detective Wanda Pierce, calm and direct, watched the 11-second clip twice and froze the frame on the boot logo. "Ostrowski Construction," she read. "We'll bring him in." 2 days later she called. "I need you to come in." Her voice told me before I'd even sat down that something had gone sideways. She laid gas station photos and credit card receipts across the table. Danny had bought coffee in Fayetteville at 1:52 that morning, 40 minutes from my house, and was still on camera there at 2:15. There was no way he could have been standing over Miles's crib at 2:13. "The boots are real," Pierce said. "But boots can be bought secondhand, at a job site, off a work truck." Somebody wanted us looking at him. I sat with that for a long moment, everything I'd convinced myself of over the last 3 days collapsing at once. That evening, Danny called. "I heard they cleared me," he said, no anger in his voice, only tired disappointment. "Somebody used my company's boots to scare you, Renee. I'm sorry that happened. But whoever did this knew your house. And they wanted you looking straight at me instead of them." The next morning, Paul called from Richmond. "You and Miles shouldn't go back to that house," he said. "We should sell it. Fast. Paul, we don't even know who did this yet. Exactly why we shouldn't wait." His urgency didn't fit the man I'd married, the same man who'd spent 3 weeks comparing lawnmower models before buying one. Something about his sudden certainty bothered me for the rest of that day, though I couldn't yet say why. That afternoon, back at the house collecting a few more of Miles's things, I heard a faint clicking sound coming from the air vent above his changing table. I grabbed a screwdriver from the garage, pulled the cover free, and found a small black device taped just inside the ductwork, a tiny green light still blinking steadily. Someone hadn't just walked through my house once. Someone had been watching us from inside it. Detective Pierce and a full crime scene team returned within the hour, pulling vent covers, checking smoke detectors, examining every outlet in the house. They found only the one device, professionally installed, not something bought off a shelf. Pierce traced the serial number through the manufacturer over the next 3 days and came back with a name, Curtis Vance, an HVAC technician who'd worked as a subcontractor on Danny's crew during the basement renovation, fired 8 months later for petty theft, with 2 prior burglary convictions on his record. "Here's what's strange," Pierce told me, tapping the file. Neither of his previous burglaries involved theft of anything valuable. He'd enter occupied homes, sometimes stay for hours, and leave without taking a thing. Why would someone do that? "Control," she said. Some offenders like this aren't after property. They're after access to someone else's private life. A chill moved through me. The hand brushing Miles's hair. The hidden camera. It all suddenly fit into a shape I didn't want to look directly at. Recovered footage from the device showed weeks of ordinary routine, me leaving for work, Paul mowing the lawn, until one clip, recorded 12 days before the break-in, showed me putting Miles down for a nap and leaving the room. 30 seconds later, the door opened. Curtis Vance walked in, stood over the crib, and looked directly into the hidden lens with a small, satisfied smile, like he was proud of what he'd built. The investigation widened fast after that. Search warrants on Curtis's last known address turned up boxes of copied house keys, notebooks of addresses, and hidden cameras traced to at least 6 other homes across 2 counties, all installed during renovation jobs over several years. None of those families had known. Detective Pierce set a trap 2 weeks later. Colleen and Miles would appear to move back home publicly, then leave quietly each evening before dark, replaced by a training doll in the crib, thermal cameras covering every entrance, plainclothes deputies in 3 neighboring houses, a tactical team staged 2 streets over. I insisted on staying inside the house myself. Pierce argued against it for almost 20 minutes before finally agreeing, on the condition I follow every instruction to the letter. If something moves, you do not investigate it yourself, she told me. You wait for my voice in your ear. That's the only way this works. I understand. I need you to actually mean that, Captain. I do. That Friday, Colleen helped me carry a few boxes inside in full view of the neighbors, making a show of moving back in. By sunset, the house looked, from the street, exactly like a family settling back into normal life. At 11:30 that night, deputies quietly walked Colleen and Miles out through the back door to a car waiting 2 streets over. I kissed my son goodnight against a training doll's forehead by mistake before I caught myself, and watched their taillights disappear down the cul-de-sac. I sat alone in the dark living room after that, wearing jeans, an old army sweatshirt, and the same boots I'd worn on duty that morning, an earpiece in my left ear carrying Pierce's occasional check-ins. North side clear. Backyard clear. Motion sensors normal. My pistol stayed holstered at my hip, more for my own steadiness than anything else. My heart rate refused to slow no matter how many times I reminded myself the plan was solid. At 2:11 a.m. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed once. Movement. A minute later, the back door lock clicked open, quiet and practiced, exactly the way it had before. Slow, unhurried footsteps crossed the kitchen. The hallway camera caught a figure in a dark hoodie and ball cap moving straight toward Miles's room without a single moment of hesitation. He pushed the door open, crossed to the crib, and leaned over the sleeping doll beneath its blanket. "There you are," he whispered, brushing its hair gently. "You're safe now." Then, quieter, almost tender, "Mommy's not coming back for you." "Go," Pierce's voice snapped through my earpiece. The closet door flew open. 2 detectives had him on the floor before he fully registered what was happening. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "You're scaring her." "There is no baby," Pierce said flatly. He stared at the doll's blank plastic eyes for a long moment, genuinely confused, and then looked up and found me standing in the doorway. "I was helping her," he said. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "You were terrifying her." Curtis Vance's arrest connected to 9 confirmed illegal entries across 3 counties once the investigation fully unfolded. Detectives found evidence tying him to homes he'd accessed during at least 4 separate renovation jobs over 6 years, families who, until deputies knocked on their doors, had no idea anyone had ever been inside watching them. His trial, 6 months later, filled the Cumberland County courtroom every day it ran. Other families came to testify, an elderly widow who described finding muddy boot prints in her hallway years earlier and blaming her own memory for it, a father who'd spent 2 years convinced his teenage daughter had been sneaking out at night, never once suspecting the truth was standing in his own hallway instead. When my turn on the stand came, I wore a plain navy dress, not my uniform. This wasn't about my service. The prosecutor played the recovered footage, and the room went completely silent. Even Curtis looked away. The jury returned a guilty verdict on every count in under 3 hours. As deputies led him out of the courtroom, he glanced back at me once. I didn't feel the anger I expected to feel. I felt, mostly, relief. Paul and I spent a long time rebuilding what that spring had cracked open between us. I kept looking for a logical explanation, he admitted one night on the back porch, months later. I thought if I could explain it away, none of it would be real. I know, I told him. I wanted that too, for about a day. I should have trusted you sooner. I took his hand. We both learned something. Next time my instincts are screaming, there won't be a next time you argue with them. He laughed, quiet and a little rueful. I hope you're right. It's been 2 years now. Miles doesn't remember any of it. To him, the backyard is just where the fireflies show up every June. We repainted his room a warm gray instead of the pale yellow it used to be, and Paul built new shelves under the window with his own hands. We didn't sell the house. For a while I thought about it constantly, but I understood, eventually, that leaving out of fear would have meant Curtis Vance still had a hand in shaping my life, even from a cell. I wasn't willing to give him that. Detective Pierce still checks in occasionally, mostly just to see how Miles is growing. She stopped by last spring with coffee, no real reason beyond that, and watched him chase a ball across the living room for 20 minutes before she said, almost to herself, I like this ending a lot better than most of the ones I get. So do I told her. Marcus, the technician who first told me to leave that house, sent a short note a few months after the trial that I keep tucked inside my grandmother's old Bible. You trusted your instincts when a lot of people talk themselves out of it. Because you did, other families finally got answers too. I read it again sometimes, usually on nights I don't entirely need to, just to remind myself the fear was worth listening to. Some nights I still wake up and glance at the clock, and if it happens to read 2:13, I don't panic anymore. I just listen. Most nights, all I hear are crickets and the wind moving through the pines, ordinary sounds I used to take completely for granted. I don't think the point of a story like this is that danger is everywhere, waiting behind every unlocked door. I think it's simpler than that. Somewhere in the middle of the worst month of my life, I learned that trusting the part of myself that refused to accept it's probably nothing was the exact thing that kept my son safe. If something in your own house doesn't feel right, it usually isn't. I'd rather you hear that from me now than learn it the way I did.